Welcome, my friend. Tonight, we're slipping behind the towering stone walls of a medieval castle. Not the fairy tale kind with feasts and fanfare, but the cold, damp, echoing halls where daily life was far less glamorous than you might think. We'll walk through drafty corridors lit by flickering torches, past overflowing chamber pots, and into kitchens where meat hung for days and spices masked decay. This isn't courtly romance. It's the gritty truth of what it really meant to live in one of history's most iconic fortresses. If this kind of raw, unfiltered history helps you unwind, I'd be grateful if you liked or subscribed, but only if it feels right to you. I'd also love to know where you're watching from, and what time it is on your end. It's oddly comforting to imagine all of us, scattered across the world, sharing this quiet curiosity together. So settle in, dim the lights, let the hum of the modern world fade. We're about to explore a life where luxury meant surviving winter without frostbite, and where power came with more burdens than blessings. The morning mist clings to the Yorkshire countryside like a whispered secret, and through its grey veil rises Warwick Castle, its limestone walls catching the first pale light of dawn in the year 1347. The massive stones, each weighing more than 3 grown men, seem to breathe with the weight of centuries yet to come. From the highest tower, a lone figure peers across the rolling hills, where sheep dot the landscape like scattered pearls on green velvet. This is Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, and he has called this fortress home for 37 years. His weathered hands, marked by countless sword practices and winter's bite, rest upon the cold stone of the battlements. The castle below him stirs with the rhythm of 120 souls beginning another day in their vertical world of stone and timber. Imagine yourself descending the narrow spiral staircase that winds through the heart of the keep. Your feet find the worn grooves carved by generations of footsteps, each stone step slightly hollowed by the passage of time. The walls press close around you, thick enough to muffle the sound of your own breathing, yet thin enough to carry the distant echo of voices from the great hall below. These stairs, built deliberately narrow and turning clockwise, force any attacker to expose their sword arm, while defending knights maintain the advantage of the inner wall. The air grows warmer as you descend, heavy with the scent of burning wood and something else, the particular mixture of humanity, livestock, and industry that defines castle life. Through arrow slits no wider than your hand, shafts of morning light pierce the gloom, revealing tapestries that tell stories of conquests and marriages, their colors faded, but their threads still strong. In the great hall, Lady Eleanor de Montfort moves with practiced grace among the servants preparing for the day's first meal. Her silk gown, dyed the deep blue of costly woad, rustles softly against the rushes strewn across the floor. These rushes, replaced weekly when fresh, carry the scent of mint and lavender scattered among them to mask less pleasant odors. She pauses beside a servant girl whose name is Maud, barely 16, whose calloused hands arrange pewter cups with the careful precision of one who knows that carelessness means hunger. The castle's inhabitants exist in a carefully ordered hierarchy, as solid as the stones around them. At its apex sits Sir Geoffrey, lord of these lands, stretching 12 miles in every direction, holder of the king's trust and commander of 43 knights. Below him, his lady wife manages the domestic realm with an authority that extends to every corner of their domain. Their eldest son, Thomas, trains daily in the courtyard, his practice sword ringing against wooden targets as he prepares for a future that may demand his life for his king. The rhythm of their lives follows patterns as ancient as the castle itself. Before cockcrow, the servants wake in their quarters built into the thick walls, sharing warmth and space in chambers where privacy exists only in whispered conversations. Mary the cook, whose arms bear the scars of countless encounters with fire and blade, begins her daily battle with the great hearth that could roast an entire ox. The flames dance against soot-blackened stones, and the heat spreads through the kitchen like a living thing, awakening the castle from its nighttime slumber. Water, precious and carefully managed, flows from the castle's well through a system of channels carved into the living rock. Young William, the water-bearer, makes his endless circuits from well to kitchen to great hall, his shoulders strong from years of carrying the heavy buckets that sustain life within these walls. Each drop represents security in a world where siege can transform abundance into desperate thirst within a fortnight. The morning bell tolls from the chapel tower, its bronze voice calling the faithful to prayer. The sound echoes off the inner walls, bounces from the outer battlements, and drifts across the village below, where peasants pause in their dawn labors to cross themselves. Within the castle chapel, Father Benedict, whose Latin carries the soft accent of his Norman birth, leads the household in their daily devotions. The stained glass windows, each piece carefully crafted and transported from distant workshops, paint colored light across the stone floor, where knights and servants kneel side by side before God, their earthly ranks temporarily forgotten in the democracy of prayer. The chapel itself tells the story of the castle's power and purpose. Built into the keep's second floor, it serves as both sanctuary and statement. Its walls bear the carved arms of the Montfort family, 3 lions passant guardant, their stone eyes watching over generations of births, marriages, and deaths. Here, Sir Geoffrey's father received his final blessing before riding to join the king's army in Scotland, never to return. Here, Lady Eleanor was married on a spring morning when the windows seemed to bloom with light. Here, their children learned to speak with God in words their great-grandchildren would inherit unchanged. The constant struggle between comfort and defense defines every aspect of castle life. Windows remain small, designed to repel arrows rather than welcome light. Rooms cluster around central hearths, their warmth more precious than gold during the long months when winter grips the land. The great hall, where the family dines and conducts business, doubles as a military command center, where strategies are planned and alliances forged. Even in peacetime, every comfort serves a purpose beyond mere pleasure. In the armory, Master Robert tends to the weapons that represent both protection and terrible responsibility. Each sword, carefully maintained and sharp enough to split a hair, bears the potential to take a life or save one. The male hauberks hang like metal ghosts, their rings individually forged and linked by hands that understood the weight of a warrior's trust. Young knights learn not just to wield these weapons, but to maintain them, understanding that in battle, a properly oiled blade means the difference between victory and death. The castle's food stores, carefully managed by Brother Francis, represent months of planning and providence. In the underground chambers carved from bedrock, wheels of cheese age in the darkness, while barrels of salted pork wait for the lean months ahead. The constant calculation of resources defines the steward's existence. How many mouths to feed, how long the supplies must last, what tribute the Lord owes to his king, and what portion must be set aside for the poor who gather at the gates seeking charity. As the morning sun climbs higher, the castle awakens fully to its daily symphony of sounds. Hammers ring against metal in the forge, where the blacksmith shapes horseshoes and men's armor. Voices echo from the courtyard, where merchants present their wares to the household purchasing agents. The steady thump of servants' feet carries up the stairs as they go about their appointed tasks. Children's laughter drifts from the solar, where Lady Eleanor's youngest daughter learns to read from a book of hours whose illuminated pages cost more than a peasant's annual income. This is the world of Warwick Castle in the 14th century, a place where stone and timber create not just shelter, but a complete universe governed by duty, hierarchy, and the eternal human desire for security in an uncertain world. Here, every stone was placed with purpose, every room designed for function, and every life measured by its service to the greater whole. The morning light that streams through the narrow windows illuminates not just a building, but a way of life that would endure for centuries, adapting and evolving, but never losing its essential character as a fortress where human beings sought to create order from chaos, comfort from hardship, and hope from the simple act of waking each day within walls strong enough to hold back the world's dangers. By the time the sun reaches its mid-morning position, casting shorter shadows across the inner courtyard, the castle has settled into the rhythms that have governed its existence for generations. The great hall fills with the low murmur of conversation as the household gathers for their morning meal, the first of two substantial repasts that mark the boundaries of each day. The long oak tables, scarred by decades of use and polished smooth by countless hands, bear the weight of wooden trenchers filled with dark bread, wedges of cheese aged in the castle's depths, and ale that carries the faint sweetness of honey. Sir Geoffrey takes his place at the high table, elevated above the common hall on a platform that speaks to hierarchy as clearly as any crown. His carved chair, passed down from his grandfather, bears the worn impressions of 3 generations of lords who have governed these lands. Lady Eleanor sits beside him, her presence lending grace to the formal proceedings, while their children learn the intricate dance of noble behavior that will govern their lives until their final breath. The morning meal proceeds according to customs as ancient as the castle itself. Father Benedict offers the blessing, his voice carrying the cadence of prayers spoken in this hall for over 2 centuries. The household crosses themselves in unison, a moment of unity that bridges the gaps between lord and servant, knight and scullery maid. Then comes the careful ritual of service, each person receiving their portion according to their station, their place in the great chain of being that connects them to God above and the earth beneath their feet. Imagine yourself seated among the castle's inhabitants, the wooden spoon smooth in your hand as you break your fast with bread that carries the nutty flavor of barley and the faint bitterness of peas, ground fine to stretch the more precious wheat. The ale, brewed in the castle's own brewery, warms your throat and settles the gnawing hunger that marks the beginning of each day. Around you, conversations flow in the mixture of Norman French and English that characterizes the castle's daily discourse, languages blending like streams flowing into a common river. The tasks that fill the castle's days begin in earnest once the morning meal concludes. Master Robert, the castle's marshal, moves through the bailey with the measured step of a man who has spent 40 years learning to see danger before it arrives. His rounds take him past the stables, where the destriers, those magnificent war horses worth more than most men's annual income, receive their daily care from grooms who know their lives depend on keeping these animals ready for battle. Each horse represents not just transportation, but a knight's life, the foundation upon which medieval warfare rests. In the armory, the morning light reveals the careful work of maintaining the tools of war. Young squires, boys on the threshold of manhood, learn to polish mail until it gleams like water in sunlight. Their hands, still soft from childhood, gradually grow calloused from the endless repetition of caring for weapons that may one day save their lives. The constant struggle between rust and steel mirrors the greater struggle between order and chaos that defines castle life. The solar, the castle's most private chamber, serves as Lady Eleanor's domain, where she oversees the complex household management that keeps their world functioning. Here, surrounded by tapestries that tell stories of courtly love and Christian virtue, she meets with the various servants who report on their specialized duties. The pantler speaks of the stores of bread and wine, the butler of the ale supplies, the chamberlain of the bed linens, and personal items that make life bearable within stone walls. Each conversation represents a thread in the complex web of castle administration. How much grain remains in the stores? Which servants have proven trustworthy with the keys to the wine cellar? What news arrives from the village below, where the castle's authority extends like ripples from a stone dropped in still water? Lady Eleanor listens with the attention of someone who understands that carelessness in small matters can cascade into disasters that threaten the entire household. The castle's children move through their daily lessons with the peculiar mixture of restlessness and resignation that marks young people learning to accept their predetermined roles. Thomas, the eldest son, spends his morning hours in the practice yard, where Master-at-Arms William teaches him the deadly dance of swordplay. The wooden practice swords, weighted to match their steel counterparts, build strength and muscle memory that will serve him when real blades seek his life. Each thrust and parry represents not just skill, but survival. The difference between returning home victorious and falling nameless on some distant battlefield. The younger children gather in the solar for their letters, guided by Father Benedict, whose patient voice transforms scratches on parchment into words that carry meaning across centuries. The ability to read and write, still rare enough to seem almost magical, represents power of a different sort than the sword. These children learn to shape letters with the same care their brother learns to wield the blade, understanding that words like weapons determine the fate of kingdoms. The rhythm of their lives follows patterns established by necessity and refined by centuries of experience. The castle's bell tower marks the hour, its bronze voice calling household meals, prayers, various ceremonies that bind them together as a community. Time moves differently between the walls, measured not by the frantic pace of modern life, but by the slower cadences of seasons, harvests, great cycles of birth, marriage, and death. The afternoon brings its own particular challenges and opportunities. The great hall transforms from the dining room to court of justice, as Sir Geoffrey hears petitions from his tenants and settles disputes that range from property boundaries to accusations. His word carries the weight of law, backed by the authority of the king, tempered by the understanding of harsh justice, prevailing more quickly than mercy brings weakness. A peasant woman approaches the high table, her worn clothes and nervous gestures speaking to a life of hard labor and constant worry. Her husband, she explains, has been accused of stealing grain from the Lord's mill, a charge that could mean death if proven true. Sir Geoffrey listens with the patience of someone who has heard countless such tales, weighing evidence and testimony with the knowledge that his decision will echo through generations of his family's relationship with their people. The constant struggle between maintaining order and showing mercy defines much of a lord's existence. Too harsh, and the people may rise in rebellion. Too lenient, and authority crumbles like poorly mortared stone. Sir Geoffrey's decisions this afternoon will be remembered in the village below, told and retold around winter fires, shaping his reputation and his children's inheritance in ways that gold and land cannot match. The castle's economy operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The immediate needs of the household require constant attention. Food, fuel, clothing, and the 1,000 small items that make life possible within stone walls. The broader economic relationships with the surrounding countryside involve collecting rents, organizing labor for the Lord's demesne, and maintaining the delicate balance between extraction and sustainability that keeps the system functioning. Master Hugh, the castle's steward, moves through his duties with the measured precision of someone who understands that small errors compound into large disasters. His ledgers, carefully maintained on precious parchment, record not just numbers, but the intricate relationships that bind the castle to its lands. Each entry represents a family, a field, an obligation that stretches back generations and forward into an uncertain future. The afternoon light, filtering through the narrow windows, illuminates the constant motion that characterizes castle life. Servants move through the corridors carrying messages, supplies, and the endless stream of items that keep the household functioning. The kitchen reaches its daily crescendo as Mary, the cook, and her assistants prepare for the evening meal. The great hearth blazing like a captured sun, while cauldrons bubble with the stews and broths that will feed over 100 hungry souls. This is the rhythm of daily existence within Warwick Castle, a pattern of life that has adapted to the constraints and opportunities of living within walls built for war, but housing the full spectrum of human experience. Each day builds upon the last, creating a continuity that stretches back to the castle's founding and forward to futures that its inhabitants can scarcely imagine, yet prepare for with the same dedication their ancestors brought to the eternal task of creating order from chaos, comfort from hardship, and hope from the simple act of carrying on. As the afternoon sun reaches its zenith, casting sharp shadows across the castle's inner ward, a messenger arrives at the gates with news that will ripple through the household like stones thrown into still water. His horse, lathered with sweat and breathing hard from the long ride from London, bears the royal seal that commands immediate attention. The porter, recognizing the significance of the moment, sounds the horn that calls Sir Geoffrey from his afternoon duties to receive word from King Edward himself. The messenger, a young man whose mud-splattered clothes speak to roads made treacherous by autumn rains, kneels before the Lord of Warwick Castle with the formal precision of one who has delivered such messages to a dozen noble houses. His words, spoken in the formal French of the royal court, carry news that will reshape the lives of everyone within these walls. The king commands Sir Geoffrey to muster his knights and men-at-arms for a campaign in France, the latest chapter in the long struggle that will later be known as the 100 Years' War. Imagine yourself standing in the great hall as this news spreads through the assembled household. The air grows thick with tension as the implications become clear. Sir Geoffrey's face, weathered by years of command, shows no emotion as he listens to the royal summons. But those who know him well can see the tightening around his eyes that speaks to the weight of decision that now rests upon his shoulders. Lady Eleanor, seated beside him, maintains the composure expected of a noble wife. Yet her hands grip the arms of her chair with an intensity that reveals the fear she cannot show. The bonds of community that bind the castle together face their greatest test in moments such as these. The feudal system that governs their lives operates on the principle of mutual obligation. The king grants land to his nobles in exchange for military service, and those nobles in turn provide protection to their tenants in exchange for labor and loyalty. Now, as the royal summons demands its due, the theoretical becomes terrifying. Young Thomas, barely 18 years old and trained in the arts of war, but never yet blooded in true battle, will accompany his father to France. The practice sessions in the castle yard, the careful instruction in swordplay and horsemanship, the endless repetition of military drills, all of it has led to this moment when theory transforms into the deadly reality of war. His mother watches him with the controlled anguish of a woman who has seen too many young men ride away to battles from which they never return. The castle's knights, bound by oath and honor to follow their lord into battle, begin the grim preparations that will carry them across the channel to foreign soil. Sir William de Braose, the eldest of Sir Geoffrey's knights at 43 years, has seen war before in the Scottish campaigns. His scarred hands and the slight limp from an old wound speak to the price of service, yet his loyalty remains unshakable. He moves through the castle with the steady purpose of someone who has learned to face death as a familiar companion. The armory becomes a center of intense activity as weapons are examined, sharpened, and prepared for the journey ahead. Master Robert, the castle's marshal, checks each piece of equipment with the meticulous care of someone who understands that a loose rivet or dull blade can mean the difference between life and death. The male hauberks, carefully maintained during peacetime, receive fresh oil to prevent rust during the damp sea voyage. Swords are honed to a sharpness that can split silk, their edges tested against leather and approved only when they meet the exacting standards of men who stake their lives on such details. The household's women face their own preparations, different but no less crucial. Lady Eleanor takes responsibility for organizing the castle's defense during her husband's absence, a task that requires careful coordination with the remaining knights and men-at-arms who will guard the walls. The constant struggle between maintaining security and managing daily life intensifies when the castle's military strength departs for foreign wars. Sister Margaret, the castle's herbalist and healer, works through the night preparing the medical supplies that will travel with the knights to France. Her small chamber, filled with the earthy scents of dried herbs and the sharp tang of various tinctures, becomes a workshop of mercy. She grinds willow bark for pain, prepares packets of yarrow to staunch bleeding, and carefully measures doses of poppy for the worst wounds that may come. Her knowledge, passed down through generations of women who have tended the injured and dying, represents the thin line between healing and helplessness that defines medieval medicine. The castle's spiritual life intensifies as the departure date approaches. Father Benedict leads special masses for the knights who will face battle, his Latin prayers carrying the weight of community supplication. The chapel, normally a place of quiet daily devotion, fills with the fervent prayers of those who understand that war makes widows and orphans with casual indifference. The stained glass windows seem to glow more brightly as candles are lit for the safe return of husbands, fathers, and sons. The economic implications of the military campaign create their own challenges. The cost of equipping knights for war, the horses, weapons, armor, and supplies needed for months of campaigning, represents a significant portion of the castle's annual income. Master Hugh, the steward, works late into the night calculating the expenses and arranging for the loans that will finance the expedition. The complex web of obligations and credits that bind the medieval economy becomes strained when war demands immediate resources from a system built on seasonal rhythms and agricultural cycles. The village below the castle experiences its own upheaval as the Lord's departure approaches. The peasants who work the surrounding fields understand that their protector will be absent, leaving them vulnerable to the bandits and raiders who prey upon undefended settlements. Some choose to move their families within the castle's outer walls, accepting the crowded conditions in exchange for the security of stone barriers and armed guards. The blacksmith's forge burns day and night as weapons are repaired and new ones forged. The ring of hammer on anvil echoes through the courtyard, a metallic rhythm that underscores the urgency of preparation. Young apprentices work the bellows while their master shapes iron into tools of war, each piece representing both craftsmanship and the grim necessities of conflict. The sparks that fly from the forge seem to carry the energy of the castle's transformation from peaceful household to military expedition. The castle's children, too young to understand the full implications of their father's departure, sense the change in atmosphere. They play quieter games, staying closer to their mothers, unconsciously responding to the tension that permeates their world. The youngest, barely 6 years old, asks repeatedly when Papa will return, her questions met with forced smiles and vague reassurances that carry more hope than certainty. The bonds of community that normally provide stability and comfort now stretch to accommodate the demands of war. Servants who have worked together for years face separation, as some will accompany the knights to France, while others remain to maintain the castle. The careful balance of personalities and skills that makes the household function smoothly must be recalibrated to meet the challenges of both war and governance. Sir Geoffrey's final preparations involve more than military concerns. He must arrange for the administration of justice in his absence, designating deputies who will handle the disputes and legal matters that continue regardless of war. The Great Hall will still serve as a court, but Lady Eleanor will preside over many proceedings, her authority backed by her husband's power, but requiring her own wisdom and judgment to maintain order. The evening meal, 3 days before the planned departure, carries an atmosphere of farewell despite the attempt to maintain normal routines. The high table, usually a place of casual conversation and family discussion, becomes the scene of last instructions and final arrangements. Sir Geoffrey speaks quietly with his knights about the journey ahead, while Lady Eleanor discusses household matters with the servants who will remain behind. The children, sensing the gravity of the moment, eat with unusual quiet, their typical chatter subdued by the weight of impending separation. The constant struggle between duty and desire reaches its peak in these final preparations. Every night feels the pull of family and home, the comfortable routines and familiar faces that make life meaningful. Yet their oaths and honor demand they follow their lord to war, accepting the possibility that they may never return to the castle they call home. The tension between these competing loyalties creates an emotional intensity that permeates every conversation and decision. As night falls over Warwick Castle, the community prepares for the transformation that war will bring. The bonds that hold them together face their greatest test, yet also reveal their greatest strength. In the face of uncertainty and danger, they find unity in shared purpose and mutual support, creating a foundation that will sustain them through the trials ahead. The castle, built to withstand siege and assault, now shelters a community bound by something stronger than stone: the human capacity to find courage in companionship and hope in the promise of return. Dawn breaks grey and cold on the morning of departure, October the 15th, in the year of our Lord 1347. The castle courtyard fills with the controlled chaos of a military expedition preparing to move. Horses stamp and snort in the crisp air, their breath forming small clouds that dissipate like the comfortable certainties of peacetime life. The sound of metal against metal rings through the morning as knights make final adjustments to their armor, each piece carefully fitted and tested one last time before the journey to France. Sir Geoffrey emerges from the chapel where he has spent the pre-dawn hours in prayer, his face composed, but his eyes carrying the weight of command that extends beyond the immediate campaign to the welfare of those he leaves behind. His destrier, a magnificent bay stallion named Thunder, whose bloodlines trace back to the war horses of Normandy, stands ready in the courtyard. The animal's size and bearing speak to both the wealth required to maintain such a mount and the deadly serious nature of medieval warfare, where horse and rider function as a single weapon. The farewell ceremony unfolds with the formal dignity required by centuries of tradition. Lady Eleanor stands beside her husband as he addresses the household, her composure absolute, despite the knowledge that nearly half the castle's adult men will ride away this morning. Her hands rest calmly at her sides, but those who know her well can see the slight tension in her shoulders that betrays the effort required to maintain such perfect control. Thomas, mounted on his own destrier and wearing armor that gleams with fresh oil and careful maintenance, represents the next generation accepting its burden of responsibility. At 18, he carries himself with the bearing his father has taught him, but his mother's eyes can still see the boy who once cried over a broken toy soldier. The transformation from child to warrior, so carefully cultivated over years of training, reaches its culmination in this moment of departure. Imagine yourself standing among the gathered household as Sir Geoffrey speaks his final instructions to those who remain. His words carry the authority of absolute command, yet also the affection of a man addressing his extended family. The defense of the castle falls to Sir Edmund de Clare, a knight of proven loyalty whose own lands lie in the Welsh marches. His experience in border warfare makes him uniquely qualified to protect Warwick during the Lord's absence. Yet the responsibility weighs heavily on shoulders more accustomed to following orders than giving them. The practical arrangements for the castle's defense have been months in the making. The remaining garrison consists of 12 men-at-arms, 6 archers whose skill with the longbow has been tested in the butts behind the castle walls, and a handful of squires too young for the French campaign, but old enough to handle weapons in desperate circumstances. Each man understands that the castle's security depends not just on their individual courage, but on their ability to work together as a coordinated unit. The departure begins with the slow procession through the castle's gates, each knight pausing to receive a blessing from Father Benedict. The priest's voice carries clearly in the morning air as he commends each man to God's protection, his Latin words as familiar as breathing, yet made profound by the circumstances. The horses' hooves ring against the cobblestones of the inner courtyard, creating a rhythm that will echo in memory long after the sound fades into distance. Lady Eleanor assumes her new role as the castle's effective ruler the moment her husband disappears beyond the outer walls. The transformation is immediate and complete, where moments before she was a wife bidding farewell to her husband, she now becomes the ultimate authority within walls that shelter over 60 souls. Her first action is to call together the senior servants and remaining knights for a meeting that will establish the routines and expectations that will govern the castle during the months ahead. The Great Hall, so recently the scene of emotional farewells becomes a council chamber where practical decisions must be made without delay. The harvest has been good this year, but feeding the castle's inhabitants through winter requires calculation, strict discipline, relative abundance, peacetime. Master presents his figures with precision. Someone understands that a miscalculation means hunger, spring crops, the castle's children adapt to changed circumstances. Resilience that marks the young throughout the story. Margaret, Sir Geoffrey's youngest daughter, 7 years old, initially searches for her father in places before accepting her older sister, Elizabeth, at 14, begins to understand responsibility that will soon shoulders as she learns the complex housing. The rhythm of castle life adjusts, accommodating manpower, vigilant. Watch schedule changes, ensure constant observation of the surrounding areas. Particular attention paid to the road of castle gates. Sir Edmund establishes a system of signals to allow rapid communication between various institutions. The village below the castle walls experiences certain transformation as the path it's a back that must. The reeve, elected by his fellow villagers, but serving at the Lord's pleasure, finds himself managing disputes and coordinating labor without the ultimate authority of knightly presence to back his decisions. The delicate balance between cooperation and coercion that maintains rural order becomes more precarious when the threat of force retreats beyond the horizon. The castle's economic life continues, but with modifications necessitated by the military expedition. The income from rent and agricultural production must now support both the castle's operations and contribute to the cost of the campaign in France. Lady Eleanor works closely with Master Hugh to identify areas where expenses can be reduced without compromising the castle's security or the welfare of its inhabitants. The spiritual life of the castle deepens as those who remain with prayer, comfort, and guidance. Father Benedict leads daily mass for the safe return of the departed knight, his chapel becoming a refuge where wives and mothers can express the fears they must otherwise conceal. The constant struggle between faith and doubt finds its expression in increased frequency of religious observances and the particular intensity with which familiar prayers are offered. The women of the castle form their own informal council as they adapt to their expanded responsibilities. Lady Eleanor's authority is absolute, but the practical implementation of decisions requires the cooperation and expertise of women who have spent years learning the intricate details of household management. The head cook, the chief seamstress, the laundress, and the various chambermaids must work together with unprecedented coordination to maintain the castle's operations with reduced staff. The winter preparations take on added urgency as the castle faces the cold months without the additional security that comes from having a full complement of knights in residence. The harvest has been gathered and stored, but the constant vigilance required to protect these stores from both human raiders and natural spoilage demands careful attention to details that might normally be delegated to others. The castle's children begin to understand that their education must now include lessons their comfortable childhood had not previously required. The boys learn to handle weapons with more serious purpose, while the girls study the administration of estates with an intensity that reflects their potential future responsibilities. The playful aspects of childhood do not disappear, but they take on a more purposeful character, as every activity becomes preparation for adult responsibilities that may arrive sooner than expected. The nights grow longer as autumn deepens toward winter, and the castle's inhabitants gather in the great hall for evening meals that serve as both sustenance and community gathering. The conversations, once dominated by discussions of local affairs and familiar gossip, now turn frequently to speculation about the progress of the campaign in France. Every piece of news, however fragmentary, is analyzed and discussed as the castle maintains its emotional connection to those who have gone to war. The defense drills that Sir Edmund institutes become a regular feature of castle life, their serious purpose balanced by the understanding that competence in arms provides the only realistic security available. The archers practice daily at the butts, their arrows finding their marks with the precision that comes from understanding that accuracy could mean survival. The men-at-arms rehearse the coordination required to repel attackers from the walls, their movements becoming smooth through repetition and constant refinement. The constant struggle between hope and fear defines the emotional landscape of the castle as autumn progresses toward winter. Letters arrive occasionally from France, their contents shared throughout the household as evidence that the expedition continues, the nights remain alive. Yet each message also serves as a reminder of the distance that separates families, and many dangers that could prevent future correspondence. Lady Eleanor maintains her composure through discipline and purpose, understanding that her emotional state sets the tone for the entire household. Her private moments of worry and longing remain carefully hidden behind the facade of confident authority that her position requires. In the solar, during the quiet hours after evening prayers, she allows herself to temper her husband's voice and imagine a safe return. But these indulgences bring private, never permitted to demand her attention. The castle endures through its first months of separation, its walls protecting not just bodies, but the community bonds that give meaning to survival. The defense of Warwick becomes more than a military necessity. It represents the preservation of a way of life, a set of relationships, and a hope for reunion that sustains its inhabitants through the long nights of uncertainty that stretch ahead like an uncharted road leading toward an unknowable destination. The first snow falls on Warwick Castle 3 weeks before Christmas, transforming the familiar landscape into something both beautiful and ominous. The white blanket that covers the countryside, muffled sound, creates an isolation more complete than any enemy siege could accomplish. From the highest tower, where sentries maintain their watch in spite of the fighting wind, the world appears as an endless expanse of unbroken snow, broken only by the dark lines of the veil. Smoke rises from the village arms. Lady Eleanor stands at the narrow walls, watching the snow dance. Each flame represents winter is the castle the stored grain, carefully rationed since the departure of the knights, now sustained frozen ground, The castle's children have adapted to the snow with the enthusiasm that marks the young in every age. Margaret and Elizabeth, wrapped in wool cloaks lined with rabbit fur, play in the inner courtyard under the watchful eyes of their nurse. Their laughter echoes off the stone walls, creating a sound that lifts the spirits of everyone within hearing. Yet even their games reflect the new realities of castle life. They build snow fortifications and practice the signals that Sir Edmund has taught them for use in case of emergency. Imagine yourself walking through the castle's corridors during these shortest days of the year, when daylight barely penetrates the narrow windows and torch flames dance in draughts that speak to the eternal struggle between comfort and the relentless cold outside. The great hall, warmed by fires that consume precious wood at an alarming rate, becomes the heart of the castle's communal life. Here, the household gathers for meals that have grown simpler but more precious as winter tightens its grip on the surrounding countryside. The evening meal on the Feast of St. Thomas, December 21st, brings together all the castle's inhabitants in a celebration that acknowledges both the turning of the year and the community's survival through the darkest months. Father Benedict leads prayers of thanksgiving for their preservation and supplication for the safe return of those who fight in France. The chapel, decorated with holly and ivy, gathered from the woods before the heavy snows arrived, glows with the light of candles that represent hope maintained against the darkness of both winter and uncertainty. The arrival of a messenger 3 days after Christmas brings news that will test the castle's resolve in ways no one had anticipated. The man, nearly frozen from his journey through snow-blocked roads, bears word from the royal court that French raiders have been sighted along the southern coast. More immediately threatening, reports reach the castle that a band of mercenaries, displaced by the war and desperate for sustenance, has been seen moving through the countryside barely 20 miles away. Sir Edmund receives this news with the calm competence that has marked his entire service. But those who know him well can see the tightening around his eyes that speaks to the weight of responsibility that now rests squarely on his shoulders. The castle's defenses, adequate for normal times, must now be tested against the very real possibility of attack by men who have nothing to lose and everything to gain from successful assault on a fortress whose defenders are fewer than usual. The preparations for possible siege begin immediately, despite the bitter cold that makes every task more difficult. The well, protected within the castle's innermost courtyard, receives additional covering to prevent freezing. The armory is checked and rechecked, with particular attention paid to the supply of arrows that could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic defeat. Each weapon is cleaned, sharpened, and positioned where it can be reached quickly in the darkness that might conceal an attacking force. The castle's women take on roles they had hoped never to fulfill, learning to handle weapons with a competence that reflects both necessity and the grim understanding that their survival may depend on their ability to fight alongside the men. Lady Eleanor herself spends hours in the armory, familiarizing herself with the crossbow that could allow her to contribute to the castle's defense, despite her lack of formal military training. The constant struggle between maintaining feminine dignity and accepting practical necessity resolves itself in favor of survival. The children's education takes on an urgency that transforms lessons from academic exercises into vital preparation for adult responsibilities that may arrive without warning. Young Margaret learns to recognize the sound of different bells and horns, each signal carrying specific meaning that could determine her actions in moments of crisis. Elizabeth, older and more capable, begins to understand the complex logistics of siege defense, learning how to ration food and water when supplies become matters of life and death. The village below the castle walls faces its own dilemma as news of the approaching mercenaries spreads through the community. Some families choose to abandon their homes and seek protection within the castle's outer walls, bringing with them their most precious possessions and their livestock. The courtyard fills with the sounds of cattle sheep, and pigs whose presence provides both additional food resources and the complications that come with housing animals not normally kept within the castle's confines. The mercenaries arrive on the morning of January the 6th, the feast of Epiphany, their appearance from the forest, like a dark revelation that transforms celebration into desperate preparation. From the castle walls, Sir Edmund watches through the grey dawn as approximately 30 men emerge from the tree line, their movements displaying the disciplined coordination of soldiers rather than the chaotic advance of simple bandits. These are professionals, veterans of campaigns in France who have turned to plunder as a means of survival during the winter months when formal warfare traditionally ceases. The siege that follows tests every aspect of the castle's preparation and resolve. The mercenaries, led by a scarred veteran whose knowledge of castle defenses comes from years of attacking such positions, establish their camp beyond the range of the castle's archers, but close enough to prevent any movement in or out of the fortress. Their strategy relies not on direct assault, which would be costly against prepared defenders, but on patience and the gradual wearing down of the castle's supplies and morale. The first week of the siege passes in a tense routine of watchfulness and conservation. The castle's inhabitants ration their food with the discipline that comes from understanding that each meal could be their last unless relief arrives or the attackers withdraw. The well provides adequate water, but fuel for fires becomes increasingly precious as the defenders balance the need for warmth against the requirement to make their wood supplies last through what could be a lengthy ordeal. Lady Eleanor demonstrates the leadership qualities that have been developed through years of managing the castle's household affairs. Her calm authority provides stability for the community under siege, while her practical decisions about resource allocation help maintain both physical survival and emotional cohesion. The Solar becomes a command center, where she coordinates with Sir Edmund and the other defenders, her presence lending legitimacy to decisions that affect every person within the walls. The castle's spiritual life intensifies under the pressure of siege, with Father Benedict leading prayers that take on desperate urgency as the days pass without relief. The chapel becomes a refuge where fear can be acknowledged and transformed into determination, its stone walls providing both physical protection and spiritual fortress against the despair that siege warfare inevitably brings. The rhythm of daily prayers marks time and maintains hope when the normal patterns of life have been disrupted by the demands of defense. The mercenaries probe the castle's defenses with the methodical approach of professionals who understand that hasty action leads to unnecessary casualties. They test the strength of the gates, search for weaknesses in the walls, and attempt to undermine the confidence of the defenders through shouted taunts and displays of captured plunder from other successful raids. Each probe is met by disciplined resistance that demonstrates the quality of the castle's preparation and the resolve of its defenders. The children of the castle adapt to siege conditions with resilience that both inspires and heartbreaks the adults who watch over them. They play quietly in the inner chambers, their games modified to accommodate the need for silence that could prevent detection of their positions by the attackers outside. Margaret creates elaborate stories about brave knights and rescued princesses, her imagination transforming the frightening reality of their situation into narratives that provide comfort and hope. The constant struggle between despair and determination defines the emotional landscape of the siege as January progresses toward February. Each dawn brings the hope that the mercenaries have departed during the night, yet each morning reveals their continued presence and the ongoing threat they represent. The defenders maintain their vigilance through discipline and mutual support, understanding that their survival depends on collective effort rather than individual heroism. The siege reaches its climax on a bitter February morning, when the mercenaries, frustrated by their inability to break the castle's resistance and facing their own supply problems, launch a coordinated assault on the main gate. The attack comes with the dawn, the mercenaries using ladders and improvised siege equipment to scale the walls, while others attempt to break through the heavily reinforced entrance. The battle that follows tests every aspect of the castle's defenses and reveals the true character of its inhabitants. Sir Edmund's leadership during the assault proves decisive as he coordinates the defense with the skill of someone who has spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The archers, positioned at key points along the walls, send their arrows with deadly accuracy into the ranks of the attackers. The defenders pour boiling water from the castle's cauldrons onto those who attempt to scale the walls, their actions driven by the understanding that defeat means death or worse for everyone they protect. The siege ends not with dramatic victory, but with the gradual withdrawal of the mercenaries, as they realize that the cost of taking the castle exceeds any potential gain. Their departure comes silently in the pre-dawn darkness of February the 12th, leaving behind only the scars on the castle walls and the knowledge that the community has survived its greatest test through courage, preparation, and the unbreakable bonds that hold them together in the face of mortal danger. The silence that follows the mercenaries' withdrawal carries a weight more profound than any sound of battle. From the castle walls, Sir Edmund watches the empty landscape where enemy campfires had burned for over a month, their absence creating a void that seems almost supernatural after weeks of constant vigilance. The snow continues to fall, covering the scars left by the siege, and gradually erasing the physical evidence of the ordeal that has tested every soul within the castle's walls. The cost of survival reveals itself in the days following the siege's end. The castle's stores of food, carefully rationed throughout the winter months, have been depleted beyond the normal expectations of the season. Master Hugh's ledgers tell a story of consumption that leaves the household facing the prospect of genuine hunger before spring arrives with its promise of renewal. The wood supplies, burned at an accelerated rate to maintain warmth for the increased population sheltering within the walls, dwindle to levels that force difficult decisions about which areas of the castle can be adequately heated. Lady Eleanor moves through the castle with the measured pace of someone who has learned to conserve energy while maintaining the appearance of strength. The siege has aged her in ways that go beyond the simple passage of time, carving lines around her eyes that speak to nights spent sleepless with worry and days filled with decisions that carried life or death consequences. Yet her authority remains unquestioned, strengthened rather than diminished by the crisis that has proven her capable of leadership under the most extreme circumstances. The children of the castle bear their own marks from the siege, though theirs manifest differently than those of the adults. Margaret, now 8 years old, has developed a habit of checking the security of doors and windows before settling into sleep, her young mind processing the recent trauma through rituals of verification and control. Elizabeth, at 14, has gained a maturity that seems to skip years of normal development, her understanding of responsibility and consequence deepened by witnessing the fragility of the security she had previously taken for granted. Imagine yourself walking through the castle's corridors in the weeks following the siege, observing how the community processes its survival and begins the work of recovery. The Great Hall, which served as both command center and refuge during the worst of the crisis, slowly returns to its normal function as the heart of household life. Yet the conversations that fill the evening hours carry a different quality now, marked by the shared experience of mortal peril and the knowledge that survival sometimes requires sacrifices that peaceful times cannot fully prepare one to make. The village families who sought shelter within the castle walls during the siege face the difficult decision of when to return to their homes below. The mercenaries' departure provides no guarantee that other threats will not emerge, yet the overcrowded conditions within the castle create their own problems of sanitation, resource allocation, and social tension. The gradual exodus back to the village begins in late February, as the most adventurous families venture forth to assess the damage to their homes and prepare for the spring planting that will determine their survival through the following year. Father Benedict leads the community in prayers of thanksgiving for their deliverance, but his sermons also acknowledge the harsh realities of their situation. The chapel, which provided spiritual refuge during the siege, now becomes a place where the community grapples with the moral complexities of survival. The taking of human life in defense of the castle, necessary though it was, requires spiritual reckoning that cannot be avoided through simple gratitude for survival. The practical work of recovery begins with an assessment of the damage sustained during the siege. The castle walls, scarred by grappling hooks and marked by the impact of stones hurled by improvised siege engines, require repair before they can be considered defensible. The blacksmith's forge, which burned continuously during the siege to produce arrowhead and repair weapons, needs restoration, bellows, Sir Edmund organizes work parties to address the most critical repairs, but the reduced manpower available means that progress comes slowly. The men who remain are stretched thin between the demands of defense, maintenance, and the basic labor required to keep the castle functioning. The women of the household take on additional responsibilities, their roles expanding to include tasks traditionally performed by men who are either dead, departed for war, or too few to handle all the necessary work. The economic impact of the siege extends far beyond the immediate costs of defense and repair. The disruption of normal trade relationships with the surrounding countryside means that the castle's income from rents and agricultural production has been severely reduced. The village, its population depleted by families who fled the area entirely, cannot provide the labor and resources that the castle's economy normally depends upon. Master Hugh works long hours trying to balance accounts that seem to grow more desperate with each calculation. Yet within this landscape of difficulty and loss, signs of resilience and hope begin to emerge. The successful defense of the castle has enhanced its reputation throughout the region, attracting the attention of other nobles who respect the courage and competence displayed during the crisis. A marriage proposal arrives for Elizabeth, the daughter's proven steadiness during the siege, having impressed the family of a young knight whose own holdings could provide valuable alliance and economic support. The spring planting, when it finally becomes possible in late March, takes on significance beyond its normal importance for the castle's survival. The seeds placed in the earth represent not just the hope for physical sustenance, but the community's faith in its own future. The fields, worked by fewer hands than in previous years, require innovative approaches to cultivation that test the ingenuity of people who have learned that survival often depends on adapting traditional methods to new circumstances. News arrives in early April that the war in France continues, but with it comes the first direct word from Sir Geoffrey since his departure the previous autumn. The letter, carried by a merchant who has paid considerable sums for safe passage through territories controlled by various military forces, brings both relief and concern. the Lord of Warwick Castle, lives and continues to serve his king, but the campaign has proven more difficult and costly than anyone anticipated. The knights who departed with such ceremony are now seasoned veterans of battles whose names will be remembered in history, yet their return remains uncertain. The letter's contents, read aloud in the great hall to the assembled household, create a mixture of joy and renewed anxiety. Sir Geoffrey's words speak of pride in his castle's successful defense, news of which has reached him through the network of communication that connects English nobles fighting in France. Yet he also warns that the war may continue longer than originally planned, meaning that the castle must prepare for extended separation and the possibility of additional challenges. Thomas, now 19 and hardened by months of warfare, has distinguished himself in several battles and earned recognition from his superiors. The young man who left Warwick Castle as an untested knight has become a warrior whose skill and courage have been proven in the crucible of combat. Yet his father's letter also hints at the psychological toll that war exacts, the gradual erosion of innocence that comes with witnessing the brutality that defines human conflict at its most basic level. The castle's women begin to plan for the possibility that the men's absence may extend through another winter, their preparations informed by the lessons learned during the siege. The successful defense has proven their capabilities, but it has also revealed the costs of such success. The community that emerged from the siege is stronger in some ways, but also more aware of its vulnerabilities and limitations. Lady Eleanor's correspondence with other noble wives provides a network of support and information that helps her understand the broader context of their situation. The castle's successful defense has become a source of inspiration for other communities facing similar challenges, its story spreading through the informal networks that connect the wives and daughters of the nobility. This reputation brings both honor and responsibility, as other communities look to Warwick Castle as an example of what can be accomplished through preparation, courage, and effective leadership. The rhythm of castle life gradually returns to patterns that accommodate the new realities of reduced population and extended responsibilities. The Great Hall once again hosts evening meals where conversation flows freely, though the topics often turn to memories of the siege and speculation about the future. The children's games incorporate lessons learned during the crisis, their play becoming a form of preparation for adult responsibilities that may come sooner than traditional childhood development would suggest. The constant struggle between hope and realism defines the emotional landscape of the castle as spring progresses toward summer. The successful defense has proven the community's resilience and capability, yet the costs of that success continue to influence every decision and relationship. The bonds forged during the siege create a foundation of trust and mutual dependence that will influence the castle's social dynamics for years to come. The seeds planted in the spring fields begin to show green shoots by late May, their growth representing the community's faith in its own future, despite the uncertainties that continue to mark their daily existence. The castle endures, its walls protecting not just physical lives, but the cultural and social relationships that give meaning to survival. The price of that survival has been paid in resources, comfort, and the particular form of innocence that comes from believing that walls and weapons can provide complete security against the chaos of the world beyond. As summer approaches, the castle prepares for whatever challenges may come, its inhabitants strengthened by the knowledge that they have faced their greatest test and emerged victorious. The scars of the siege remain visible on both the castle walls and the faces of those who defended them, But these marks serve as testimony to the human capacity to endure, adapt, and find hope, even in the darkest circumstances. The story of Warwick Castle continues to unfold, its next chapters written by people who have learned that survival requires not just strength and courage, but the willingness to transform adversity into the foundation for future resilience. If you're still awake, I can't help but wonder, what kept you? Let me know in the comments. Maybe tonight's journey was a little too vivid, or maybe you just need something softer to drift off to. Either way, here's hoping the next one does the trick. Next time, we'll head somewhere new. Perhaps we'll uncover the quiet rituals of ancient civilizations, or dig through the dust of forgotten libraries in search of long-lost truths. But until then, carry this with you. Every comfort you enjoy today was built on the backs of those who endured hardship, ignorance, and unimaginable struggle. Sleep well, if sleep comes. And remember, history never truly fades. It lingers in the dark, whispering its stories to anyone willing to listen.